Okay, hello there, and welcome to the Inner Fellowship of Men, Angels, Spirit, and Spirits. I'm Justin. We had some difficulties with the first attempt at streaming this. Hopefully, my internet will be working a little bit better from this point forward, but there's no guarantee of that. So, who knows? Maybe this live stream will not carry out for this week. If not, that's perfectly fine. It's not so urgent a matter to discuss, but there were some things that just sort of came to me, just some insights that came up to me that I figured I would share. And so, yeah, that's what I'm going to do now. I'm going to share them. Essentially, there is first and foremost, there is this. There is the fact that okay, it is true, it is no longer hyperbole that America is now under authoritarian rule. I don't know if this is the first time that it has ever occurred, but I know that it is occurring now. There really can be no doubting that. There's no way of getting around it. The simple fact is that yes, there is authoritarian rule going on in America, and the president has basically successfully convinced enough of the country that the truth doesn't matter so much as the way that you feel, and that the way that you feel ought not be determined so much by what is happening as what he tells you is happening, whether that is true or not. And that's a very dangerous place to be in. I imagine that that's exactly where Hitler's Germany was at the time that he took power, that people were just, I guess, basically they were so desperate for what they felt they were losing, and to get it back again, that they just, whatever they could do, believe whatever they could believe, any strong man who told them that they would be able to keep what they felt like they had and were losing, any strong man who could come and make them feel like they were regaining power again, and that they could regain power in such a way, well, that person is someone that they would listen to. And while they would find all these ways of rationalizing why they're doing that, the truth is that there are some fairly primal motivations behind it. And we cannot really get to what those primal motivations are in others until we're really willing to address them in ourselves. So what's happening in America? Okay, so we know that the military, with the National Guard, has been mobilized. ICE is being mobilized in a military fashion as well. And they've been invading properties and places and cities and localities that have not invited them, where the governors and mayors have said that they are not welcome there, but because the president has decided that they are places of what the president considers to be a national emergency, they are being sent there from countries like Texas, or what would it be, Florida. So basically, what we have right now is a leadership that is orchestrating what is potentially a civil war if there is any resistance on the part of the local government. And to be honest with you, if there is any belief in the Second Amendment and the belief that people have the right to bear arms, as I've mentioned before, it is for this reason. It is because it was believed that there might be some crazy person who takes over the central government and then begins to use the force of the federal government to force its will upon the local governments, and the local governments had better have an armed and well-regulated militia that can fight off such a threat. So it's ironic that, again, the people who believe that they should have the right to bear arms, if there was such a right written into the Constitution, it was probably with the understanding of that which is happening right now, where foreign usurpers, foreign to the state at least, or foreign to the city, are coming in at the behest of a central government that is wayward by their understanding, and basically uh, terrorizing the people. Now, I don't know how it is in these cities or in these states. I deeply suspect that that our president Donald Trump is much moved by what he sees on television, and oftentimes what he is seeing on television is not what's happening right now, but things that may have happened historically. That he is It is easy for him to believe it's happening now because he wants to. And then when he says that those things are happening now, the people who follow him, or it's easy for them to believe that those things are happening now because they want to. And just this notion that one political persuasion now has the power to assert its will over regions dominated by another political persuasion by the sheer force of the military. This is exactly what a democracy was not to be. And so it is why we can unequivocally state that, yes, America has now become an authoritarian state. And we should pay attention to what we see around us if we're living in America. I say we, but of course I'm not living in America. But if I were, I would be paying attention to what you see. How many people around you are okay with this? You know, it's not that everyone needs to be protesting and not everyone needs to be putting themselves in harm's way to object to what's happening, but you can quite easily see the people who are just like, well, I don't know what's going on. I just wish we could all be peaceful. You can quite clearly see when deep down this is actually something that they want and that they are enjoying. And even though it may be all of the things that they had previously said it was not about, like Project 2025 or the oppression of certain racial compositions in the country, or those who uphold a certain uh, cultural standard or not, it's getting harder and harder to deny that that's exactly what is going on. There is this sort of, I guess, cultural backlash of a certain type of people, a certain type of white people who believe that this is their country and that it is their right. And in fact, their obligation to make sure it goes in the direction that they determine, not that other citizens who they share the country with determine, who may disagree, because those are not the real citizens, because they are not as white or as male or as straight, or basically just not of the same political persuasion as them. So they should have the right to just force their way into the future of the country. Now, of course, that is one of the fastest ways to prove your error, and this is the reason why many months ago, maybe even over a year ago, I pointed out the wisdom of delay when it comes to the Lucifer rebellion, because the faster the error is presented and presented as the evil that it is, and then we begin to recognize the sin that it is, and then we begin to recognize the iniquity of it all, it becomes more plainly, easy to determine the wrong way has been gone, and that is the way not to go. So sadly, even though it's going to cause hardship, it is causing hardship, it's causing trauma, people are being terrorized, but it is the fastest way to without a shadow of a doubt recognize what is the right way, or at least what is the wrong way, and therefore what is the right way by contrast. This is the wrong way. We are going to see it, we are going to feel it, and we have so determined that that's the only way that we would learn this lesson, which is the legacy of this planet Earth, or as it might be called, Euratia. And it's not only happening in America. It looks like in Japan, they finally have chosen a new prime minister. So they have a new leader, and she's choosing a new government. The new leader, I only tend to know these leaders by their last name, but her name is Takaichi. Takaichi is a far right-wing, sort of nationalist type of person, not quite so extreme as Donald Trump or what you might find in Europe, because really Japan, just the general whole political spectrum is pretty much to the left of what you would consider American politics to be. But she has been running on this kind of Japan first kind of idea, where she's pushing back against this notion that Japan's salvation might be in its outreach to the world and its welcoming of the world to become meaningful parts of Japanese society that Japan might survive given its population crisis. Now, she doesn't seem to present too many answers in the alternative to that, but it's just that there's too much of this, letting Chinese people will come in and attend our universities and buy our properties, and too much of this letting other neighbors push us around because we don't have a written into our constitution that our military can fight preemptive wars and first strikes and things like this, wanting to change the constitution so that Japan can become militarized again. She's not, like I said, not quite so extreme as America because, I mean, Japan just is not such an extreme country as America is. It never has been. Even in World War II, Japan was not as extreme as you might imagine that America was. I mean, they really did have to drug people and brainwash people and really keep a sort of hysteria going in the country to maintain that war, which America did not have to do to such an extreme because the people themselves were so captivated by the evil of their enemy that it was quite easy just to get people to join the military and get people to join the workforce and to all pull together because they were so certain of the evil they were fighting because the evil looked so different from them. Germany, more mystifying, but not so mystifying anymore because we can clearly see that what was happening in Germany and what is happening in Japan even now and what is happening in America right now is that a certain number of people, whether they have a right or not to believe that this is their country and their country only, believe that they're losing their country to someone else. And therefore, they're taking up more conservative, more nationalist, and hopefully not in Japan, but certainly in America, more extreme methods of trying to take back the country by sort of, terrorizing the other political party or the other political wing into obsolescence or obedience. And like I said, this is the fastest way to prove you are wrong. This is why Hitler's Germany lasted longer than anyone would like to hope. I mean, it was nearly 10 years or maybe even more than 10 years. But America, it might be even longer for America, but the truth is, in the scale, the scope of how long things usually take to eradicate real misunderstandings, real error in society, it takes generations and generations, and this might be eradicated a lot more quickly if the error continues to manifest such as it has. I think there was some tale of the person who's in charge of border security having taken a bribe in a paper bag, some fast food paper bag, $50,000, having taken a bribe to give certain people some special consideration with regard to the border before he even took over this position. And it looks like the Department of Justice basically just swept that under the rug because obviously he's working for the administration. Now, what happened to that $50,000? We don't know. We don't care. There was a national oversight congressional meeting where the head of the Department of Justice was supposed to meet and actually talk to the leaders who she is supposed to, according to the Constitution, answer to. And basically, she was there just as strident and as antagonistic as you can imagine a person be. Basically, anyone who asked her questions about the corruption in her government, which was obvious, and obviously under her purview, she would just respond back with accusations of what was wrong with that particular politician, what they did wrong in their history. And she had all the opposition research done. So whoever asked her a question she didn't like, she could just come back at them with, some scathing remark having nothing to do with the issue, or just, be outraged and feign offense at whatever the implication might be to the question, and therefore never ask the question. Even actually stand before the Congress and say things like, I'm not going to talk about that. Like she can decide what she is supposed to talk about. And this is because there is a certain absence of solemnity in the court. And in this case, the court, I mean, is the Congress. We call the court a court, not because it's a court of justice, but because a court is supposed to be a meeting wherein divinity is acknowledged and divinity is adhered to. That's what a court is supposed to be. This is why a king has a court. because the king is supposed to be a divine representative, and all of the court hands are there to acknowledge what this king in his representation of divinity is determining. And of course, the court has a religious leader who advises him, has other advisors. But this court is basically supposed to be the place where divinity from on high speaks to the wisdom of man, and essentially the Most High's rule in the kingdoms of men. That's what the court is. And the Congress is a court. The Oval Office is a court, not just the Supreme Court. That's not the only court there is. These are all places where ideally, people have, say, a prayer of invocation and evocation that makes them all clear that what they are attempting to do is the Father's will or some divine will according to whatever their religious understanding is. But right now, that solemnity is completely lost. That sanctity is completely gone. It's completely gone. It is lost entirely. That sort of loyalty to what we had previously understood to be a standard, but in fact now we understand to be the very spirit and presence of God in our lives, has been forsaken for want of political agendas and even religious agendas. And notice when I say religious agendas, remember, I'm not saying that religions necessarily have to do anything to do with God, or at least not the living God. And that will speedily rush me on to what I guess I wanted to get to. And this notion of gods. Now, you probably remember that the Judeo Christian religion was born out of this culture of multiple gods, many gods. Now, these gods may have been revealed through a very definite history of seemingly superhuman men and women who had just this power that most people didn't have, and therefore could rule over other people through sheer force of that power. And their names and sometimes even their likenesses had come to be known by the people they ruled over, even long after they had passed. These what they call the mighty men of old, and most of these names and faces, as they have been passed on, have now come to be known as mythology. You know, we have the Greek gods who were adapted by the Roman gods, but the names and faces were changed to adapt to their culture. But the Greek gods probably had been adapted from the Egyptian gods, whose names and faces have been changed to fit their culture. And of course, the same thing happened with the Hindu faith in India. A lot of it is based on the Egyptian gods, and then that was sort of passed on through to China through Buddhism, and a lot of the Buddhist gods were obviously Hindu gods, which were based on the Egyptian gods, and the Egyptian gods were based. The Greek gods were similar, and then of course the Roman gods were similar, and then the Norse gods. Basically, all of the gods, all of these multiple gods, were basically based on a legacy of superhuman beings in some time before recorded history, even before what recorded ancient history or known ancient history, when there were mighty people with superhuman powers, we believe, who ruled over us, the regular people, presumably because they were under the favor of a God that was above them. Until some time that they came to declare themselves to be gods in their own right. And this is really our side, sort of like the before the curtain version of what happened in the Lucifer rebellion. But we're not going to go so much into that distant history, so much as to understand that legacy of these sort of ancestral gods, these racial gods, these cultural gods. The truth is, our minds spring from divinity. Our very mindedness is a work of the infinite spirit. So it is a supernatural reality that we have the ability to think, the ability to imagine, the ability to reason, not just the ability to feel emotion, but to derive from that emotion certain meanings and potential values. all of that is the wonderful inner psychic territory that has been granted us by the fact that there is a spiritual reality and a physical reality that must be negotiated by coordinating the two, which necessitates such divine mindedness, such that we have. Now, were these great beings really gods? Well, gods, as far as what we understood gods to mean at that time, which meant just great powers in Japan, they have no problem recognizing a god or a kami as not absolute or all powerful, but just having some particular attribute in which they had favor over others and therefore could be appealed to help with regard to that particular attribute that they had. That would be it something we find in nature or something we find in our greatest superstitions. Either way, that's really what gods have been throughout the better part of our known human history. They've just been beings with some power to help us in some way, or so we believe, or beings with some power to destroy us in some way. Therefore, we want to appease them so that they will not. More often than not, it is the latter more than the former. But as time went on, it became more the former. So much so that these racial gods with these names that have been known from history and faces and likenesses that have been known from history and passed down from one culture to the next and sort of acclimated to suit one culture or the next, they began to be sort of figureheads for political parties, people of a certain persuasion, whether it be a political persuasion, which was almost always downstream from a cultural persuasion, which was almost invariably generated from a racial persuasion, right? Racial tendencies would lead to cultural traditions, and those cultural traditions would lead to a certain kind of politics, and people who identified with those certain kinds of politics who would more often than not be a part of that cultural and racial persuasion would then have this political figurehead. So in many ways, like Mars, the god of war, or you know, Thor, the god of thunder, or Zeus, the god of gods, so to speak, or Amaterasu, the god of Japan, or you know, no matter what the god is, Thoth, the god of well, science, who was basically one of the first scientists in Egypt, who had been deified, right? Like these gods, so to speak, were basically just like political party labels. In the same way that, like the Republicans in America now have the elephant as their party label, and the Democrats have the donkey as their party label. Does anyone really know why? Probably not. And there must be some reason. It's probably easy to Google and you can find out. But the fact is that no one really cares why. It's just that these symbols sort of represent their political persuasion or agenda, even as those persuasions and agendas might change throughout the generations. Still do these symbols remain. And this is the reason why Jesus was not one who would want to leave graven images either of his face or even anything that he'd written, because he knew that those images in themselves and the things, those words that he had written and the things that he'd written them on would become sort of like these kind of tokens, these symbols that people would adapt to their own, and then in that way try to adopt cultural persuasion, and then in that way try to adopt his religion of spirit into their, as a representative of their religion of mind. You didn't want that to happen, and yet that is exactly what did happen, right? I mean, when he came in, he realized that already the religion that was revealed to Abraham by way of the priest of Salem, Melchizedek, that the priest of Salem had revealed the one God to him in hopes that he would, then spread this word out to that throughout the land, and revealed to the other missionaries in hopes that they would spread the word of the one God in preparation for the Son of God to be born into this world. And of course, Abraham did his best to do so. But you'll find throughout his lineage, there has always been this fight to stop this one God ethos, we'll say, from being reduced into this sort of cultural icon, this sort of idol that is basically more about one people or a type of people and upholding their way of being. And it's really for this reason that we get this legacy of Moses going up to receive the word of God on tablets and coming down, that finding that in his absence, people had resorted to, sort of building idols and statues and things that could represent to them themselves and that which upheld their way of being, not that which revealed to them the better or best way of being, just that which protected them in their way of being. The calf, the golden calf is how it's presented in the Bible. But this would happen quite regularly, where people would take this revealed God and kind of reduce it into this sort of evolutionary ancestral God of theirs, and complete with attributes of theirs, agendas of theirs. And this has happened with Judaism to such an extent, right, that they could not even realize or recognize the one Son of God who their whole religion was based on preparing for. The whole mission of the Melchizedek to reveal to Abraham to start this religion was to prepare these people, to choose these people to pave the way for one who would reveal the one God as his Father. And they could not recognize him because they had so reduced and concretized the notion of God, the great I am, into some ancestral God of their own that is sort of like their patron saint of sorts, that when he came not revealing a preference for them and their way of being, but a revelation of a greater and more living way of being, they could not acknowledge him. They would not acknowledge him. They, in fact, denied him. They, in fact, saw to it that he was ended, at least in his flesh, by way of prosecution and eventually persecution and crucifixion. Okay, so that's what happened with Judaism, but that's not like it hasn't happened with any other religion. It's happened with all religions. This is why when you go to India, you'll find that they have so many gods in the Hindu faith. They have so many different gods, the one with the many arms, Kali, Vishnu, Shiva. I want to say Babar, but Babar is actually Babar. I think it's a character, British cartoon character, but it's an elephant, and I forgot what the name of the elephant god was. But there's so many gods you can find in the Indian pantheon of gods. But you'll find probably not no less in Japan. They say that they have 1,000,000 gods or however many gods, because for anything that they can appreciate, be it in nature or in life in general, they call it a god and give it a name, and there you have another god. And it's a thing that upholds their state of mind. It upholds, it sustains, it articulates their way of thinking, being, and doing. It reveals nothing new. It guides them in no new way, but it does sustain them in what they have established in and of themselves so far. And that's what evolutionary religion does. And when we say evolutionary religion, that's what we mean when we're talking about ancestral gods, cultural gods. And of course, when we talk about Christianity, largely we are unfortunately talking about what has also been reduced to this sort of ancestral God, so that Jesus has now become, not necessarily in one particular country, but especially so in America, this sort of upholder by certain cultural persuasions of a certain way that they are, that don't necessarily have anything to do with the way he was or how the way he was might appeal to other people given the way that they are, right? There are so many different ways that Jesus was, and I think for any culture or racial persuasion, they might find something different to be impressed by these different ways that he was, in the same way that there were 12 apostles who all found something different to be impressed by this one man, this living spirit. But of course, religion made that unholy alliance with authority, and then you had religions of authority, and suddenly this legacy of Jesus the Christ became little more than a mascot for a particular occidental version of culture and what they believed or perceived faith to be. It was a religion that not only accepted violence, but glorified violence, necessitated violence, made sure that the maintaining of order was always maintained through violence, made sure that those who were superior secured their superiority and maintained their superiority, and those who did not, their superiority, they were subordinated ruthlessly, not even until their ancestors could prove themselves worthy of a greater legacy, but just to keep them down there for the utility of it. And of course, this religion, Christianity, became tied to this legacy of slavery and oppression and empire and all these things that we say are not so good now, but still are very much a part of the, we'll call it, religious life of many Americans. So much so that you could even see a politician in their advertisement asking for you to vote for them, holding up a Bible, supposed to be the word of God according to their own beliefs, and putting a gun on top of it and showing how that's supposed to be, appealing to their audience. And it does. To a particular audience, there are people who believe that the word of God and a gun have some place in the same hand or for the same purpose. And this is how religion becomes what it has become. Not so much a living faith, not so much a living spirit, but more about the ancestral gods, the assumptions that we and our ancestors have had about themselves and the great ones who uphold them. And I guess what I wanted to speak to now, and very briefly, because I want to be able to take a nap before I do my next event, is that there is a reality to even those ancestral gods. There is deity to even the concoctions we imagine of divinity based on our, like I said, racial tendencies, cultural assumptions, and, national traditions and things like that. There's reality to that. It is a reality that the true and living God must contend with if the Most Highs are to rule in the affairs of men. It is the reason why the Lucifer rebellion could not just be ended, as soon as it had started, because to end it would be to uproot all of that evolutionary connectivity with the living God that needed to exist for God to be able to be revealed in the hearts and the minds of men proper. So everyone, all peoples, needed to have their mythologies and their ethoses and even their idols that that inasmuch as they had some similarity or commonality with the living way of the living God, the living spirit, then the living God would breathe life onto those forms such that they performed in a way that did effectuate people's longevity, people's of thriving rather than just surviving, based on just these similarities. It's like these what we call religious gods, what we call these ancestral gods, or we call false gods, or we call them idols. In a certain phase of God's evolutionary reality that we call the supreme, these gods have a reality and a real function, not only in our lives, but in the evolution of deity in this world, in this universe, and in this universe of universes. And what role that will be in its fullness, we will not know until the fullness of time. But we can know that those roles are playing out even now because we have been granted the revelation of a supreme being who is the personal culmination of all that we have experienced God to be in all the many phases and functions of our existence, including our ancestral gods, our political symbols, and our ascended masters, and all of the things that many a men have stumbled onto in the past and seen a way to sort of glorify and even deify themselves, thinking that they could sustain themselves in death, as Eve had been convinced would be possible through the life of their progeny, so long as they were believed in and worshipped or what have you. Well, it hasn't kept them personally alive, but it has kept that image, that imprint, that phase of deity that is the manner in which God can effectively reach our hearts in a way that no other reach our hearts more effectively than any other way might afford. It's sort of like, we've got to build our own sandcastle before God can tell us, okay, by the similarity to that of that sandcastle to what the real castle is, God can begin to inform us as to what architecture truly means and what it does. But we've got to first start building our own sandcastle, and then God can then, on the basis of us building our own sandcastles, inform us as to what will stand the times. And that is the case with our ancestral gods and our deities. Now, this Jesus that loves but loves not his enemy, this Jesus that, you know, is trying to preach and reveal the kingdom of God and yet can't get around to it because he's too stuck trying to uphold the borders of men. This Jesus will not withstand the times. Thankfully, that's not the living Jesus. That is, like I said, an ancestral God of an Occidental people who really, really do think and believe that this God, this ancestral God, has empowered them to do what they have done in the past, and therefore glorifies them continuing to do it in the future, even more ruthlessly if necessary. But the problem here is that we've all got ancestral gods. We've all got our traditional, if not a word or a face or a symbol, certainly just a way of knowing that which is divine and sacred in our lives, the way of relating to it, a way of identifying with it that is tied to our cultural traditions, to our racial integrity. It is so bound to it that you couldn't just artificially graft in something else. You can try, that's what was tried with Christianity with the slaves, and given that the spirit of Christ is a living spirit, a living spiritual experience did occur, but it was never without the ancestral tendencies. That's why you got the wild dancing and why you have gospel music sung the way that you hear it sung now, with this sort of, we would compare to what like a Catholic church might have or a European church might have. It's got more of a guttural, primal feel to it, got more of a rhythm to it, because it's really incorporating ancestral gods and building that up to what can be in alignment with the living God, and gradually, to the extent that it just crowds out that which is not in the alignment with the living God. Well, this is happening for every culture. It's happening in Japan, it's happening in China, it's happening in Egypt, but it's going willy-nilly when the forebears of the one true and living God that's supposed to inform that process for all other cultures has just reduced it to that which is meant to maintain their culture. And not only their culture, but their cultural dominance over others. Because you see, it's easy to tell yourself that you're just protecting your own homestead. But when you recognize, when you really are able to acknowledge God in your presence enough to be honest and sincere with you enough and to know that that homestead was someone else's homestead that you have taken, and now you're not protecting yourself so much as dispensing with them so you can take their land. And then, of course, in doing so, this leads the legacy of fear that someone will come and do it to you because it's what you have done. It's sort of a karma of speaking, not that one that will occur, but one that you certainly shall fear. And of course, as it does occur, it doesn't even occur in the way that you feared. It occurs in the way that you upheld, in the way that upheld you, through democracy, through the free exchange of ideas, and discovering which of those ideas, if lived out, will work, and which of those ideas, if lived out, will not. The simple fact of doing that, we get to see which of these ancestral deities really do have the likeness to the living Christ, and which of these do not, and do not, which nor do they wish to take on such likeness. This is the project that's really going on in the upper echelons of the human consciousness, in as much as we can say that they are purely human. It is, how are supreme these contributors to the supreme being transformed in the mind of man, or if they are being transformed in the mind of man, to what degree? And of course, that can only be known to the degree that certain spiritual fruits are being borne out in the lives of individuals and collectives, or they are not. So when you start seeing Black Hawk helicopters descending upon buildings, and people rappelling into those buildings and forcing out other people of a different color, to be sure, and sort of handcuffing, tethering children to each other and putting them into rental moving trucks as a holding facility so that you can capture illegals, even though most of the people are just Americans who, while they may be legal, are undesirable, really, by that landlord, to be sure, who called them to perform this exercise and terrorize them into moving. When you start to see these kinds of things, you realize, okay, now this is the legacy of certain old gods. Old gods in the sense of the ancestral deities and ancestral ways of being that refuse to change, refuse to harmonize with the one true living way. Old gods that die hard, coming out to show their faces again. And that's what we're going to be seeing a lot more of these days. I don't know that it's necessarily a good idea to call these old gods or these wayward spirits by names and things like that. I think there's been enough of that they should continue to exist to this day. Certainly shouldn't refer to them as demons. At best, we can just refer to them as DNA. And and sometimes it truly is junk DNA. And it won't be wiped out by eugenics. No, this is not a physical problem. It is a spiritual problem that manifests psychologically, therefore. And so, yeah, so here's the challenge, though. Like, when we have trouble harmonizing with people who are different from us, something about the language the sounds they make when they speak their language, something about the way they look, something about the size or shape of their facial or body features that we just don't like. They just rub us the wrong way. We are actually looking at conflicts between ancestral gods. I mean, that's just one way of looking at it. I wouldn't take it too far. I wouldn't mysticize it too much. But we are in the higher psychic arena looking at ancestral gods that have not learned to love and appreciate and, in certain ways, to accrete with and amongst each other, to each other, in accordance with the true and living God, which is their only way of life and continued life. Like when you just don't like the way that person smells, it's not that they haven't cleaned or washed, but they have a smell. Maybe they ate something that you don't like to eat. You don't like the way they see things, the way they treat each other. I mean, it doesn't really matter. When you have this sort of visceral sense of dissonance with a way another type of person is, you're dealing with a conflict between these ancestral gods. And if you're from the West, especially in America, you have this, a lot of you, especially if you're of the white composition or persuasion, you may have this sense that your ancestral gods were right, are correct, and their ancestral gods were wrong. And therefore, Jesus and all the angels and all the heavens support you and your ancestral gods and their ways, even though their ways are not the ways of the kingdom, and are supportive of you and being against them in their ways, in the ways of their ancestral gods, even if those ways may be in accordance with the ways of the kingdom. See, here's the jeopardy that we all face. Doesn't matter what our politics are, what our political persuasion is that we are all correct about something, but we are also all in error about something. And when I say we, I'm talking about we as the collective individual, the individual who is composed of composite beings who are inclusive of ancestral deities, racial tendencies, musical tastes. But we know, most of us, if you've lived in a big city, you've known that through exposure to that which you otherwise would not have had a taste for, you can acquire a taste for it. You can gain a certain appreciation and even an affinity for that which is so different from you, and even because it's you hate what's different about you, but actually accentuates the value of both. This is what happens when those ancestral gods are learning to bow before the same God. They learn to appreciate each other. But when they do not bow before the living God, no matter what they call that living God, well, they find themselves in this place where they just can't move forward, and all they can do is fear, therefore, being taken back or taken aback. And I guess that's just too bad, isn't it? That's what we're seeing here, especially in America. If you're finding that there are certain people who are just loving how the country is being taken back from a majority by a minority, despite the fact that the majority has found a way to live harmoniously with its followers, only because there's this minority of people who just don't like that or just feel like they're losing something when that happens. Well, there you are with the ancestral gods that will not change, will not truly convert in the spirit. And at some point, it's just fuel for the furnace. Now, I'm not talking about personalities being judged and going to hell, not that. I'm just talking about those aspects of ourselves that we hold on to, but we don't need anymore because we have God, a living God, who affords us a living faith, whereby we do not worry that the outcomes will not be just exactly what God wills. We are not left feeling that it's up to us and we need to control or make sure this thing happens or this thing doesn't happen. We understand that we are living for a spiritual reality that is untouchable by anything that we can control, save our minds. And when we are possessed of such ancestral, we'll call them tendencies for now, that just won't smoothen their sharpened edges enough to ascend to such a childlike faith as to enter into the kingdom and do the work of the kingdom and not just stand at the gate deciding who should and should not come close. Well, you're not destined to become the enemy, but you're destined to have enemies, and you're never to be without them. You know, none of us will ever be without the poor. None of us will ever be without the homeless. None of us will ever be without the stranger. And we are blessed for that because it affords us the opportunity to be good. It is the kind of evil that allows us the space to be good in the supremacy of things. But if you're just the one who's just trying to fight against the one who's different from you, you're always going to have not strangers to be good to, not poor people, no, enemies, enemies, enemies whom you hate and therefore will only be able to perceive as hating you. You'll never be safe. You'll never be comfortable. You will never be possessed of that peace that goes beyond understanding. Not ever, because you're holding on to an ancestral God that will not bow down to the living God. And you're choosing to die with it. Nothing you can see with your material eyes belongs to you, belongs to your people, or was gained by you or your people alone. At the very least, it was with the assistance, voluntary or otherwise, of people not like yourself. And at the very greatest, it was at the behest of a living God, because by so doing, so assisting you, you could be the greatest blessing to the greatest number of people for the longest amount of time, and for no other reason than that. Yeah, and of course, because he loves you, but even such love does not guarantee you such blessings. Being a blessing is the only thing that assures blessings. Your value to others, your service to others, that determines in the supremacy of deity your godliness, your greatness. And that's the thing when it comes to the supreme being, the evolving God, right? The notion that there was a white supremacy, that there ever was a white supremacy, is a false notion. It is true. It is true that many of a composition that culminates into what we now call whiteness may have a plethora of talents that lead them to either to survive or even thrive over others who have other talents in one day and age, but then in the next day and age, that could be completely different. You see, because it's not the supremacy of white, it's the supremacy of light. It's not white supremacy, it's light supremacy. Because there is a one light that shines within the heart of all of us, certainly within the minds of all of us, seeking access to the hearts of us all. That light can be known best in the likeness of a man who was a true and living God named Jesus. Not that he should be worshiped, but that he should be seen as a role model to pattern yourself after and find in your way how to be like him in some way. And therefore, like the Father in some way that basically is the signature of your very ascension throughout the universe of universes. Light supremacy. You see, because God the Supreme is not the God of a particular type. God the Supreme is the God of all. God the Supreme is the culmination of all that we could have experienced of any aspect of deity in our lives, personally or impersonally. That's what God the Supreme is. God the Supreme is the love of all. And if you're talking about someone or another as being the special ones, the special group that is special, despite the fact that it does not actually help or serve all, you might be talking about white supremacy, but you're riding a dinosaur into extinction. There'll be that which all races will be able to acknowledge, and that is the light, that the same light burns in each other's eyes, and you can see it. You can confirm it by the spiritual fruits that they bear. And when they don't, well, something else has been revealed, hasn't it? Not just how much you tolerate someone who's different from you, but how much you actually learn and understand and even grow to appreciate and even love someone who is not like you. That is where you begin to recognize light supremacy. But that is a very powerful thing, more powerful than anything you could have built up about or around yourself. Therefore, it might be easier for you to retreat to your racial preoccupations or your cultural insistences or your political agendas. But at the end of the day, it shall be known that only the light inside of us all that enables us to acknowledge the light in each other, only that light shall be the supreme being in the end. And if you wish to be without it, in this supreme emptiness that is a vast territory for us to build and to have our experiences, you can experience that. I wouldn't. Light supremacy has just been too good to me. Light supremacy has just empowered me to be too good to others for me to forsake. But like I said, you know, if you come from a certain vantage point where you have had an advantage and you just want to keep that advantage, well, that's a temptation that you were born with, and maybe I wasn't. So I wish you the best. I hope you can negotiate that temptation. In a certain way, I was blessed to not be in such a position, such a privileged position, as to not recognize the value of light supremacy over the notion of white supremacy or black supremacy or brown supremacy or any other supremacy in the light that shines from within the indwelling spirit. You know, and I'm going to finish with this. You know, I've heard that, okay, the Super Bowl is coming again. I'm in Japan. I don't really keep up with American sports. I never really did. But I guess they've determined that they're going to have a Super Bowl halftime performer. And I don't know why this is such a big deal, but apparently many people are getting really upset because the Super Bowl halftime performer is some guy named Bad Bunny. I don't know any of his music, but then again, I'm an old head. There's no reason for me to know his music, but apparently he is one of the most successful artists in the West right now. And it seems as though he is successful without touring in America. And he doesn't tour in America because he's Hispanic, he's Latino, he is from Puerto Rico. He is Puerto Rican, from what I understand. He sings Spanish music, he raps in Spanish, he can sing and rap in English, like most Puerto Rican people can. But, you know, he's in touch with his cultural ancestors or traditions. And he doesn't want to tour in America because he doesn't like the idea that maybe while he's touring, ICE agents might be coming and picking up people who came to see his concert and shipping him off to God knows where because of white supremacy. And because of his popularity, he's been chosen to be, I guess, a headliner at the halftime show of the Super Bowl. Super Bowl is a game of football. I don't know why people care so much about the halftime show anyway, but it seems like of late, the halftime show has been one bit of pageantry or another of cultural appreciation. We'll put it that way. You know, we've seen like Beyonce. I think the last one was I forgot the rapper who's really good, whose name I can never remember. I can't remember now, but you know, I mean, it's been more and more the sort of brown and black kind of culture. But then again, that's kind of what's been happening in America, right? I mean, you can listen to a country song, and even the average country song is going to sound a little bit hip hop. It's going to be a little street if it's cool, right? I mean, it's not going to be just straight honky tonk. I mean, nobody does that anymore. And if they do it for a small crowd, right? But people are getting really upset. Who? Black people? No. Brown people? No. White people? Not necessarily. But certain white people who believe that the Super Bowl is an American pastime. And by American, they mean white. By American, they mean English speaking. They believe it is theirs. And they are outraged that now not only is the black people rapping and black women being independent, and now a Hispanic at this time when we're rallying up all the Hispanics and shipping them out of the country. At this time, the Super Bowl chooses to have a Latino perform in Spanish, a loud and vociferous fighter of what is being done to Latinos in America right now. That kind of thing, right? I mean, what is that really? Like, oh, this is America. This is the Super Bowl. It's a Super Bowl. There's a whole bunch of brown people peppered in there, peppered in there, salted in there with a few white people, yeah, but mostly brown people, and being paid to crash into each other to their usually to their psychological detriment for money to pay mostly rich white people. Why? Because it entertains who? Mostly white people. That's not going to stop. Bad Bunny is not popular just because brown people listen to him. That's not going to stop. It's not the brown people taking over. It's not the black people taking over. It's not the white people losing ground. It is people of all races learning to appreciate what can be appreciated about people of other races, about those other races themselves. Light supremacy. I wonder how that phrase makes you feel. Light supremacy. That's what you may expect to see. And as bad as it may seem, and as much as it may seem like people who don't deserve to have authority seem to have it, what you're going to notice about the Supreme Being is that there is a concomitance to authority. Authority is only as real as it is aligned with the Father, at least over the fullness of time. So that which abuses its authority loses its authority. This is not something that one needs to make happen. This is not something that one needs to speed along to its happening. One may just simply be safely secure in the knowledge that's what happens. Just as surely as a surfer who surfs off the wave falls down, right? Authority that abuses its authority loses its authority. Because as we have learned of late, the authority of man is derived from the mind and in the eyes of men. Men, women, and children is what I mean. When it begins to be abusive, the argument is made that its authority is not true. When it is representative of fewer and fewer people and detrimental to more and more people, then it becomes ever more clear that it is not the supreme being. It is not light supremacy. It is but the darkness that may seem to win the day for a season, but only succeeds in proving itself to be dark, and therefore more revelatory by contrast of what true light supremacy is. Just something to keep in mind while you're being outraged or while you're watching people try to use outrage to escape from accountability, or people trying to demonize enemies to justify the unjustifiable things that they do. While you're seeing that occur, just remember that when you are a supporter of the light supremacy, you can just see the signs of its own undoing even as it's occurring. It's like watching a man say that he's fully clothed while he's taking his clothes off. You can see him getting naked. Gonna catch a cold soon. That's inevitable. Now, you don't have to just watch, you get to choose what role you want to play. I strongly recommend that you include God in your consultations with regard to that choice. Include God in that. Allow God to be a part of your wisdom as to how to proceed further. Allow God to transform those ancestral gods within you into that which is like a string on a lute that is well tuned to play the melodies that God is playing on this day. It's kind of a strange analogy, but I think I'll leave it there because it's gotten quite late. It's been over an hour. And yeah, I did want to take a little bit of a break. So we'll stop there. If you have any questions, by all means, you can leave them at any time, right? You can, I don't know, leave a message, leave a comment. If you ever want to join this live stream, I usually have it around this time, around this day. Send me a direct message. We can actually, be flexible around the time and day. So if you really want to join the conversation and be heard and hear others, then by all means let me know, and we'll try to work that out as well. But in the meantime, just remember that the inner fellowship here, we are talking about the supremacy of light supremacy, right? And what you see going on out there, whether it's white supremacy or it's Black Lives Matter or it's Antifa or it's MAGA or it's the Nazis or all the other names out there, if they can't see the light, they can't be the light. The question is, can you? See you next time.